about a song like Brian Wilson, which I wrote when I was 19, I don't think I fully understood that it was a song about depression at the time because I hadn't been diagnosed with anything. I felt a kinship with Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys. Hi, I'm Stephen Page, and this is SoundAdvice.
Well, thank you so much for being here with SoundExchange today.
Thank you.
Tonight, you're playing a show at the Hamilton, and you've been touring all over North America this spring. How would you describe a typical Stephen Page show?
Well, so a Stephen Page show, normally I travel with the Stephen Page trio. There's a few different configurations that I'll travel with, but kind of my ideal is the trio, which is myself on guitar and piano, Kevin Fox on the cello, and Craig Northey on electric guitar. And we do stuff going back as far as the very first Barenaked Ladies record. So that's 30 odd years. And then all the way up to my most recent album, which came out in 2022. And maybe throw in some new stuff as well. And lots of, it's kind of, I think of it as like catching up with old friends. There's a certain amount of like, you have to reminisce about the old days in a certain way. I'm not against that, but, and then it's also just kind of catching up and seeing where we've been in the time between.
I love that so much. And so before touring the world, you began your music journey in Scarborough, Ontario. Mm-hmm. Take us through some of your earliest music moments and like, where did your love for music begin?
So yeah, I grew up in Scarborough, Ontario, which is a suburb of Toronto. And, you know, my parents are both teachers, but both really into music. My dad was a drummer in like a, you know, kind of a wedding band thing, but they were both also really involved in the folk music scene in Toronto and big fans of jazz as well. So there was a real range of music around the house as well as whatever was just on the radio. But for me, like the biggest thing that kind of blew my mind up, and I think it's the same with a billion other people, is the Beatles. When I first like understood, we had a few Beatles records when I was growing up, and they were all kind of later period Beatles records. And then I heard the early Beatles, and I couldn't believe it was the same band. And then when I realized that it was like all the span of 7 years, it kind of like, you know, made me want to understand like how that stuff gets made. But for me, singing, like I was never good enough at playing a guitar or even piano or whatever else. I was uncoordinated, and I knew these other kids who were like hotshot players, and that was not me. I didn't like practicing. I still don't like practicing. I like standing around with my friends in a room with instruments and snacking and talking, and eventually some music gets made. But as far as like actually doing the hard work of practicing was not my thing. I liked writing songs. So I thought I would be a writer, not even of music. I took music in school because I had to as part of the thing. Like we actually had lots of great music programs in Scarborough. One of the things that we had was an all-city choir. So once a week, kids from all over the city of Scarborough would come together, and 100 students would sing in this choir. And you know, I wasn't a sports kid at all, so I didn't know that thing of striving for excellence with other people and like trying to create something bigger than yourself. And that was what being in the choir provided for me. On top of that, you have your singing, which is such an incredibly, it's such an intimate thing. And it also makes you very vulnerable. You know, your voice is such a private thing, and to put it out there openly next to other adolescents it's a big deal. And I think in a certain way, I still spend my career chasing that feeling I had as a teenager of singing with other people. That's why I do it.
Kind of going more into what you were sharing about your experience with music education and programs like where your earliest music moments began, I'd love to hear more about the importance of music education.
Sure. I think, you know, people often think about music education in a way where they have to like justify it. Like, oh, music education makes you good at math. Well, you know, the other thing it makes you good at is music. Like that's just as important a skill as some of the other skills that we have decided are essential in schools. You know, it provides a lot of the same kinds of stuff that sports does, as far as like working with other people, being able to listen. Like the skills you develop as a listener are really important. But the thing we can't discount is the fact that we hear a lot of doom and gloom about making music these days, and it's true. I think I make less per record than I used to make 30 years ago. It's a downward shift for a lot of people, but it's also still a place where people can make a living as a musician. And it doesn't mean always making recordings and putting them online. Like, that's kind of what we think making music is. But there are so many other ways to make music as a job, and in a way, whether you're playing in clubs or you're teaching, whether it's in public schools or privately, whether you're creating different kinds of musical content than the standard kind of write a song and put it online thing, which is a great. I mean, that is my idea. It's how I make music. Is I compose things, record them, put them online, and tour behind them. It's a very old-fashioned model. It still works for me, but I think if we can expand our ideas of what a musician is and what it can be, all those skills, when they're taught in the schools, allow you to be doing that from teenage years onward.
Absolutely. Do you feel like there was a foundational lesson or a piece of advice that you got from that period of your life that sticks with you today?
I think the lesson I learned early on as a student, like as a high school student, it wasn't explicit. I mean, there'd be lessons about not being prepared, or not being fully engaged, or not having your homework done. Like that, those are kind of, I think we would have heard those in any discipline. But in music, for me, seeing my friends and seeing my peers kind of outside of themselves, like watching them play and going, holy crap, he's a good trumpet player. Like, he's just the guy I hang out with at lunch or whatever. And all of a sudden, there's a transformation that happens. I think for me, that lends insight into the fact that, like, the people that we're close to, we don't always know everything about them, that they have an interior life. And sometimes music is an opportunity to safely express that interior life. And I think that's really important for people to be able to see each other in a deeper way.
I love that. You've also used your platform a lot for advocating for mental health and sharing your own journey. What's inspired you to be so transparent, and whether that's through your music or speaking directly on it?
Well, talking about my mental health journey and struggles with depression and anxiety and so on, it's something I've dealt with a lot in my music. Some of my earliest songs, I think about a song like Brian Wilson, which I wrote when I was 19. I don't think I fully understood that it was a song about depression at the time, because I hadn't been diagnosed with anything. I felt a kinship with Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys. And at that point, in the music press and in music literature, to talk about Brian Wilson it was like a punchline. His mental health journey, his mental health struggles were often seen as some kind of rock and roll casualty, and like that was easily dismissed that way. But I knew there was something phony in that identification, that there was something deeper, and it's not something that he spoke about, but you could feel through his music not only his struggles but his triumphs. And that's what that song Brian Wilson was about the power of music to transport you somewhere else, or to lift you out of the darkness, or at least help you find the opening to move out of that. So once I understood that that's what I was writing about, that's kind of became part of my identity, I also realized that audiences were connecting with that, and it was helping many people express how they felt about things. It made me less afraid to do it in song. When I started speaking out loud about my own journey, I was nervous. I'm still nervous about it. Who am I to complain? I've got a great life. You start to kind of like outspeak yourself. You talk yourself into a corner thinking that maybe this is fake. And I think that's the struggle that so many people have. They feel like, well, I don't have it as bad as that person over there or that person over there, so why should I even pay any attention to my own mental health? And I had been asked maybe about 15 years ago to guest host a radio program on the CBC in Canada about mental health. And I think that having those discussions with people who were professionals or people who had written about it or people who had, some pretty dramatic experiences with mental health, I realized it was an opportunity to connect with other people. And that's it's super helpful to me, but it's also the greatest thing is when people after I do a speaking engagement, whatever else, feel like it's their opportunity to share their story. And that's the greatest gift for me.
Wow, yeah. Do you have any advice for other artists that want to become better advocates through their platform as a musician?
Well, I think if you're an artist that you do have that platform and you have a connection with your audience and you have experience. I think almost all of us have some experience with mental health struggles, whether they're our own or a family member or a coworker, a bandmate, whatever else. I think the best thing you can do though is to speak about it and not claim to be an expert. I think that's the thing. I don't have the statistics in my back pocket. I don't have all the science in my back pocket. What I do have is my own experience, and I don't confuse that with science or statistics. All I can do is tell my story. And the best thing I recommend to people is if they can afford it. So, for instance, let's say you're in college and there are mental health services on campus. Take advantage of it now. Get yourself into a place where it becomes part of how you see your general well-being. And it's worth checking in when you're not, on a rigorous routine of mental health care, whether you're not on medication, you're not doing therapy, whatever else, to check in now and again is really, really worthwhile. And sometimes talking about it is a great way for you to not avoid the darkness when it's creeping around the corner.
Before you were talking about your collaborations with the Stephen Page Trio and also with the Trans-Canadian Highwaymen. Mm-hmm. How did these collaborations come about?
Well, with the Stephen Page Trio, I had done a bunch of different configurations. I had a six-piece group I called the Original Six, and then I had a couple of different duos, one with Kevin Fox on cello and one with Craig Northey on guitar, and two really good friends and brilliant musicians. And I realized if I took these two duos and made a trio, it's like forming a supergroup. It just clicked, and that's what happened with the Trans-Canada Highwaymen. Was myself and Craig Northey, who also plays in the trio with me, and is in his own band, Odds, connected with Chris Murphy from Sloan and Mo Berg from The Pursuit of Happiness. We've known those guys forever, and all singers, or in my case, former singers of kind of 90s, 2000s modern rock bands from Canada. We thought it would be kind of hilarious to start a supergroup. The initial idea was just to do a touring show, one of these guys on stools singing songs and telling the stories. And we thought maybe that's boring. Maybe we should be the band rather than doing that thing. And so that's what we decided to do, was we would all play our greatest hits. And then later we recorded an album of kind of Canadian greatest hits from the early 70s. We're working on future volumes of that now. But if we all played our own kind of biggest hits and the other guys swapped instruments. So, on a Sloan song, I'm playing drums, and on a Pursuit of Happiness song, I'm playing bass, and my own, I'm playing guitar, that kind of thing. And it really makes the shows even that much more fun.
Yeah. And I mean, throughout your career, you've worked in a lot of different collaborative settings and different groups, and I'd love to know, what makes for a good environment for collaboration?
Well, the interesting thing about collaboration, and this is what I've learned as a solo artist, is that you're so rarely actually doing it yourself. You're always collaborating with somebody, whether it's management or booking agents or other musicians or the person who's mixing your record. All those kinds of things are collaborations where you have to be able to be clear in presenting your ideas to people, defending your ideas, but also being open to other people's things. Collaborating as a songwriter, I was talking about before about vulnerability. It's a very vulnerable position to put yourself in, to be told no, potentially, by somebody else in the room when you're pouring your heart out. Maybe behind a wall of metaphors, but in general, you're expressing how you feel, and you have to learn to hear no as not a rejection of yourself, but as a suggestion that doesn't fit where we're going. As long as we've decided together where we're going to go, or if we change directions, that we change directions together. So it's a matter of respect. It's really about respecting other people. But the key thing is listening. I mean, I think that's what makes a great ensemble on stage. That's what makes for a great musician, is a great ear. I mean, a great ear and great choices, and also technique. But technique on its own, or kind of technical ability on its own, is not enough.
Yeah. You're really keeping the collaborative environments going this summer with the upcoming Stephen Page Summer Camp. Where did this idea come from? I think it's so fun.
During the pandemic, we started a Patreon. Just kind of, it was a way to try and connect with people, and I was doing live streams, which I still do. Like, I was doing them once a week. Now I do them once a month when I can, and it was a way to let people download past live streams, connect and tell them about where I was coming up, and just kind of create a sense of community. And we did a barbecue. I live outside of Syracuse, New York, and we did a couple years ago. My wife Christine and I invited a bunch of anybody from the Patreon to come to Syracuse, and we got a space in a park, and my parents and her parents and flip burgers, and I played some songs, and we did a Q&A and stuff in this, just in a public park in Syracuse, and people came from all over. Like, people came from the West Coast and from the UK and from Canada, and we thought, wouldn't it be great if we could do a multi-day event? And I found this company called Music Masters Collective in the Catskills in New York, who do exactly this kind of thing. And so we tried it last year, and it was a huge success. So trying it again this year, it's really fun. So I get to basically, I bring the bands that I'm in. So it's the Stephen Page Trio and the Trans-Canada Highwaymen, and then we have a few people who are just like close friends that we've played with over the years. So guys like Wesley Stace, known as John Wesley Harding, who Barenaked Ladies did our first U.S. tour opening for him. Dean Friedman, one of our first hits in Canada, was written by Dean. And then we've got Dave Foley from Kids in the Hall that we've known forever and ever. So it'll be a really fun. Dave Hill also on it, just pals. But the great thing about it is, for the people who come, and again, they come from the UK, and they come from the West Coast and the East Coast and Canada and all over the US, they can, if they want to, play. They can collaborate with each other and play at night or play during the day, play us their songs, get some feedback on that stuff. We also have an all-camp choir where we've done choral arrangements of a bunch of my songs, and my son Isaac conducts them, and it's pretty awesome.
Having been in the industry since the 90s, how have you adjusted to major industry shifts in the last 30 years?
Early on in my career, the band started in 1988. Our first major label album was in 92. And we got very, very lucky. I mean, at the time of our biggest success, 1998, 1999, was the absolute peak of income in the record business. Record CDs were earning the most money possible, and the highest numbers being sold. So we got very lucky that way. At the same time, we also got very kind of oddly lucky because radio in the United States became deregulated, and ownership of radio became deregulated. So it meant that all these indie radio stations that we had built up relationships with all across the United States all got swallowed up by Clear Channel or conglomerates like that. And they all took we were kind of their secret house band, and they all took us with them to head office, and we became kind of, the secret house band for all of these regional and national chains, which gave us a few really big radio hits. Now that kind of thing doesn't really have the same kind of impact. Radio doesn't have the same impact. Even just kind of the major record labels and the types of records they're putting out, or types of records they're putting promotion into, is totally different. And then, of course, social media didn't exist at all back then. We used just word of mouth. It was like we would come to a town, we'll come to Columbus, Ohio, or and play a small club, and people would buzz about it and tell their friends. We'd come back. The great thing for us about what we did then was we toured all the time. We'd just be in a van and you'd do a circle and you'd circle around. You'd come back to Columbus and it would be a bigger club. But then you can also have done Cleveland the night before and Cincinnati and Indianapolis. Like you just keep going, and we did that for years, and that was really helpful. I feel like there are far fewer gigs to play now, and the ones that are there, it's harder and harder to get them booked. Like people are blocking out huge chunks of stuff, and you try and book a venue, and they say you have the 7th hole on this place. There's 6 other artists in line in front of you before you can actually even try and book a place there. So it's a lot harder to do it. We tried early on to to dip our toes into kind of the first wave of even pre-internet interactivity. So CD-ROM stuff that was on, we used those in the way people use TikTok and Reels, et cetera now, like as far as like stupid skits and parody songs and fake ads and all that kind of stuff. That's, if I was a young artist now, that's what I would be doing. I would just be kind of like having fun with the form. And I think that's what a young artist needs to do, is just use the form to help express who they are. Like, what's their voice? What's their point of view? I mean, the obvious example would be like Chapel Roan. We've seen, her bedroom and then you also see her playing in front of 60,000 people. There's no disconnect there. It's all the same artist. Her audience understands it. I feel like I'm a little too old for this. I don't want to be an old fogey, but part of me is like, oh, I already did that stuff. I just want to like play in a folk club and stay in the Hampton Inn and I'll be okay. But if I was young, I'd be all over that. I'd be, because I think it's more exciting than it is depressing if you use it right. But I think it can be overwhelming and depressing. And I see lots of artists, it looks phony. Not young artists, mostly artists who are closer to my age, where they've got a team doing it and it doesn't feel authentic and it doesn't feel like it has anything to do with their personality or their music. But some people are afraid to share their personality as well. They want to be able to create a wall. But I think you can do that with social media too.